Okay, I believe that we are now good to start. So welcome to the Civil Service Fast Stream and Diversity Internship Program Situational Judgment Questionnaire webinar. And my name is Orisi Komi. So what to expect from today's webinar is we will go through, after this webinar, you should have a good understanding of the application stages, particularly the Situational Judgment Questionnaire, as well as an understanding of the civil service competency framework and what the civil service are looking for in the situational judgment questionnaire, as well as key dates, which I hope most of you should now be aware of in terms of the deadlines. So firstly, like most large corporate employers or large employers, the civil service uses a range of psychometric testing to assess candidates, and the situational judgment questionnaire is one of many tests that most of the large organizations use to measure candidates. And what it is, in essence, is a series of hypothetical scenarios that, in this case, the civil service sets up to really assess and see how candidates would respond to these scenarios. So, for example, that could be you've been assigned a task to complete a project by 12 noon tomorrow. And with that, you've been asked to work with a group of colleagues across departments, and you've been asked to get in touch with them to book a meeting. So it'll give you a range of options, what the best approach to take is. For example, it would say, give you a list of options and ask you what the most effective approach would be or what the least effective approach will be. And the choice is for you to choose what you think the most effective or the least effective option is. And depending on what you choose, you'll be given a mark. And if you get the question correctly, you'll be scored 1 mark. And if you choose one that is effective, but not the least effective, you'll be awarded half a mark, as opposed to in regards to the civil service. The idea behind it is the clue behind, or the secret behind situational judgment questionnaire is that you are being measured against the organization's competencies. So hence why I mentioned earlier to look through the civil service competency framework, because this is key in order for you to respond to the questions. Usually there is a temptation, or there is a general assumption by people who respond to a situational judgment questionnaire to approach the question based on how it makes sense to them, based on how they would approach on a normal day-to-day basis. And this is where most people fail, because what organizations expect is that they expect you to respond to their questions based on the competencies that they have put in place for their workforce. So the secret to passing this test is to study each organization's competency framework, understand how they think, understand how they expect you to behave, and then you respond accordingly. And by following this instruction, you have a stronger chance of being successful than not. So with the civil service, what an overview of the situational judgment questionnaire is, they ask you to decide on the best course of action given some work-based scenario. And they assess particularly focusing on the decision-making, so your ability to make effective decision. And they also look at other competency areas. However, the key area that they look for is your decision-making abilities. Things to be aware of when completing the situational judgment test, as I mentioned earlier, is to familiarize yourself with the competency framework, understand what they're looking for, understand what they expect from a civil servant, and use it as a guide, as a criteria to guide your responses. Again, as I mentioned earlier, do not refrain from using your own opinion and your own judgment, but instead use the competency framework as a guide to respond to the questions. And try as many practice questions as possible, which you'll get a chance to do today, and carefully read the given scenarios and answer options before responding, because there are clues in the questions to help you, almost to direct you on how to answer the question. So again, consider what would be the best responses, given an option between what's the most effective and least effective option. And the questionnaire, you have up to 5 days from when you click start, from when you complete your application form, you have up to 5 days to complete the situational judgment test. So even if you start a day before the deadline, or so long as you start before 12 p.m. and Thursday the 25th, you still have up to 5 days to complete it. So it gives you a bit more breathing space to practice before you start. And they usually advise that it will take between 30 minutes to complete it from when you get started. As well as the situational judgment questionnaire, there's also the civil service also assess using a behavioral questionnaire at the first stage. Again, there's no option to practice this because it is something that is measured against your behavior. And so this is why there's no practice option for the behavioral questionnaire. It's quite similar to the situational judgment test in the sense that they ask you to rate yourself against the civil service competencies. So it's how would you fare? And with this, the advice is to be as honest as possible when responding to these questions. There's temptation to give what we think the civil service may want to hear, and usually when people do that, it tends to work against them. So it's important to give an honest reflection of your preferred style of working. However, it's important to be aware, again, understanding the civil service competency framework. And someone mentioned earlier the area for you, the section for you to focus on is level 3, which is the HEO, which is the High Executive Officer level. So that's the area that you want to focus on when reading the competency framework. And again, it's about thinking about your own personal qualities in relation to competency areas, and the question is untimed. Again, however, they advise not to spend too long on any given question. So that's just an overview about the situational judgment questionnaire as well as the behavioral questionnaire. So what is the competency framework? Competencies are the skills, knowledge, and behaviors that lead to successful performance. The competency framework sets out how the civil service want people in the civil service to work. The framework is used for recruitment, performance management, development discussions, and for decisions about progression. This is why I mentioned earlier that when responding to not just the situational judgment test or the behavioral questionnaires, as well as, fingers crossed, if you do make it through to the video interview stage, as well as the fast stream assessment center, it's important that you respond to each question on the back of the competency framework. And you're going to hear me say this over and over and over and over again. And as it says on there, the framework is used for recruitment. So this is why it's important to understand it before even taking any of the tests whatsoever. So for those of you who've had the chance to read through the competency framework today, so I hope by the time when we get the chance to practice the test, you should be able to have a good understanding how to respond to it. However, if not, we'll get the chance to, I'll be able to go through and give you some responses and feedback as to why the answers are, give a feedback on why the answers are chosen as the correct answers, in this case, the most effective or least effective answer responses. So what is the civil service looking for? So 3 key areas, broken down into 3 key areas: the strategic directions, engaging people, and delivering results. In addition to that, I would like to also bring your attention to the civil service core values. These are empowering, inspiring, and confident. So it's looking into people that are able to deliver results, and people who are able to engage other people, i.e. confidently engaging, the general public and stakeholders at large, as well as people who are able to demonstrate their ability to set direction. So seeing the bigger picture and changing and improving and making effective decisions. You should all have the framework in front of you, so I'm not going to go through them in depth. I'm just going to have an overview, skim through what they are. So seeing the bigger picture is your ability to have an in-depth understanding, the knowledge of how your role fits in with the organization, the wider organization, and the wider public needs and national interest. So seeing how you fit into that big cog or wheel, if I could say that you use that term. And also looking at how you're able to, in terms of changing direction, looking at how you're able to take initiative and be innovative and seeking out opportunities to create effective change, as well as making effective decisions and using sound judgment, evidence, and knowledge to arrive at an accurate decision-making process. And the reason why this is important, because as a civil servant, you're expected, there are 4 things you're expected to do. So to be expected to be honest, to act in integrity, to be impartial, and to be objective. And this is because as a civil servant, it's not it's not about using your own opinion or judgment, because the people that you serve, you're working on policies that could impact the lives of millions, and if not billions, because there's an impact in the global economy as well. So it's about understanding the severity and importance of your role as a civil servant. This is why these core values are important. So honesty, integrity, impartial, and objectivity. And this is followed by, your ability to communicate effectively and working, representing the civil service with pride to the general public and to wider stakeholders, and doing so with enthusiasm and passion. Again, looking at your ability to collaborate with people, because you'll be working with individuals from different backgrounds, both culturally, ethnically, so social status, as well as gender and sexual orientation. So this is why it's important that they look for people who are able to demonstrate their ability to collaborate and partner with a diverse group of people, as well as building capability for all. So looking at having a strong focus on continuous learning for yourself. So looking how you improve yourself and improve others, and look in terms of how you can also improve the organization at large. And finally, looks into managing a quality service, delivering at pace, achieving commercial outcomes, and delivering value for money, which is absolutely important. That's an overview about what the civil service are looking for, and I hope it gives you an understanding of how to respond to the questions in the test. So the area I suppose you want to really focus on is the setting direction, so making effective decisions. However, it's important to get to understand the other areas in the meantime. So these are the key dates, deadline coming up next week for this Fast Stream and Summer Diversity Internship Program. And for any first years that we have here who are applying to the Early Diversity Internship Program, the deadline is 12 p.m. Thursday, the 15th of November. So this officially brings us to the end of our presentation before we go on to the test. However, if you have any questions in the meantime, by all means, use the email address here to get in touch with us, which you all should have. And you can also visit the faststream.gov.uk website to access more information and resources on there. So we are now going to use this opportunity to practice the test. So bear with me, I'm just going to go back to, if I could ask you all to open up your link on your screen, as we're now going to go through the slide, the test questions. Before we move any further, does anyone have any question in the meantime? No, not at the moment. Okay, so I take it that we are. Yes, someone just said they were not able to receive the email. You can access the framework online. So if you type in Civil Service Competency Framework, you should be able to access it online. It will come up. So I'm just going to just spend the next minutes, take a few questions before we go on to the test. So this setting direction comes under strategic cluster, that comes under the strategic cluster, which is also titled setting direction. So that if making effective decisions come under the strategic cluster hyphen setting direction. So on there, so the number 3, so number 1, you have seen the bigger picture. Number 2 is changing and improving. Number 3 is making effective decisions. Again, that is just that's one of the core areas that's focused on. So looking in terms of effective decisions, However, it's important to familiarize yourself with all the competency framework before when responding to the questions. Again, just to go back to the presentation, for the situational judgment test, the main things to look for is making an effective decision. However, they will also be assessing on all the competency areas. So the key, the safest option is to familiarize yourself and understand the framework overall. So we have created a summary version just to give you an overview. However, as I mentioned in the email, which I understand some of you have not received so far, I would advise to study the whole thing on which you can access online. If you type in Civil Service Competency Framework, it's a public document. Anyone can access, can find it. It is called Civil Service Competency Framework. Okay, what we're now going to do is to start the test. So the time now is 4:32. I'll give you all 10 minutes to complete the test. It's only 5 questions for now. The real test is about 25 questions long. However, you should be able to get through this in 10 minutes again. Do not worry if you get it wrong. What I would ask you to do is write down the answers that you chose. Make a note of the answers that you chose, i.e. the most effective and least effective. Make a note of those, and then we'll go through the correct answers later on. It does also give you the correct answers, but the main thing is to discuss and go through the scenarios why the answers are why the correct answers are the correct answers, basically. Hope that makes sense. So I'd say let's get started. So we have about 10 minutes. So we'll come back again at 4:43 to go through the answers and go through more in-depth questions and explanations. So I'll come back again in 10 minutes. If you have just joined us, we're currently going through practicing the situational judgment test practice online. You should, I know it seems like someone has just joined us in the last minute or so. If you don't have, what I would recommend that you do is to search online for the civil service. If you don't have the test open already, it's to search for online using FastStream 2018 hyphen the online test. If you type that as that's FastStream 2018 hyphen the online test, search that on your internet browser, and it will take you onto a blog with a link that says practice questions for the situational judgment questionnaire. If you practice that, and the next 3 minutes we'll go through the answers and discuss it in more detail. Okay, welcome back. I hope you've now all had the chance to practice the test. And before we go through the answers, I'm just keen to hear, how did you find it? Just for to share your thoughts on how you found. Again, it's okay if you haven't completed it, you get the chance to practice it later, but the main thing just to understand the processes behind identifying the most effective or least effective answer. Someone said it's quite tricky. Would anyone agree with that? It is quite difficult. Okay, someone says difficult. Is that what everyone else says? Someone says it's weird, challenging. Yes, I agree. Okay. Got mostly the most effective. Okay, but didn't do so well as the least effective. Yes, the least effective can be quite tricky. Well, hopefully when we go through this shortly, you'll be able to get a gist of how it works. So challenging. Anyone else want to share how they found it? So far we have, it's quite tricky, difficult, weird, challenging, got most of the effective right, challenging. Okay, so general view that it's quite tricky. Okay, again, which is okay. This is the first time, perhaps this might be the first time you're practicing the test, and which is fine. And again, it goes to show why it's important to, get familiar with the competency framework. And finally, before we went, what did you notice so look, from what you've gone through the competency framework so far, which one of it would you say you identified that came up the most during the test? Which of the framework competencies would you say you identified or noticed? Would anyone like to share which competencies they noticed? Identified when responding to the questions? It's absolutely fine if you don't want to, but I'm happy to share. Collaborating, okay. Yeah, there were some aspects of collaboration, decision making. Yes, I would agree with that as well. Definitely collaborating and decision making came up. I think collaborating might have been, question 2 or 3. But yes, there was definitely collaborating and decision making. Would anyone else like to share just one or two more before we get moving? If not, I'm happy to continue. Well, I'll definitely say decision making came up a lot. Communication definitely came up. I think what came up the most, pretty much all of the questions were centered around mainly effective decision making. So that's the common theme I picked up on from each question. So what I'm going to do now is go through the answers and then explain the thinking or the reasonings behind the answers. And it'd be great as well if perhaps if you can all share what your answers are. Again, it's okay if you got it wrong, if you didn't get it correctly. Do not feel bad. This is not about making people feel any sort of like remorse or feeling shame. This is why it's called a practice session. So it is absolutely fine. Just want to highlight that before we move on. So for question 1, question 1 was, your line manager has asked you to provide a summary of a 20-page European Commission policy document. Again, this is quite an important document. She needs this to prepare for an important meeting that is happening in the near future and does not have time to read the whole report. So the situation is just simply provide a summary of a 20-page document for a line manager who doesn't have the time to read through the document. So for them to basically get the key facts and figures and information from the report. However, the document is not well written and is presented in an order that you feel is not very logical. Here's the temptation. Presented in an order that you feel is not very logical, although it has been agreed at senior level. So there's temptation there to cause you to change it. However, it says it has been agreed at senior level, meaning the clue is don't change the document. Do not change it. This is why you got to refrain from using your own opinion. So the option is the correct answer. The most effective answer for that is C, which is create the summary in the existing order because you've been asked not to, it's been agreed at senior level, ensuring it is clearly written so that your line manager will be able to understand it because then she doesn't have the time to go through the document in detail. There was probably a reason for why it was presented in this way. So again, this is why that's the most effective answer. So follow the order that's been given in. There's probably a reason why it was done in that way, but ensure that it's clearly written. So that's the most effective. And the least effective is A. Again, this is where least effective is tricky because B is also an effective option. So write the summary of the document, but change the order so that it follows an easier format. It is effective. The temptation is you're thinking, well, I'm using my initiative. Yes. So that's an effective option. Or there's other option, which is D, which is arrange a meeting with your line manager to raise concerns about the structure of the document before starting the work. Again, that's also another effective option. So if you want to choose D as the least effective, you probably get half a mark. But the reason why A is the least effective is because it says rewrite the document before creating the summary that is easier to understand if others pick it up in the future. Again, that's completely taken off from what the instruction that was set. The instruction was the document has already been agreed at a senior level, so you don't know why it's been done that way. So speaking to your manager might give you an idea, which again, hence why that's hence why that's an effective option. However, it's not the least effective option. So what you want to select is, out of all the options, which one is the least effective, that goes against the instruction that you've been given, and vice versa, which one's the most effective that goes in favor of the instruction that you've been given. So I hope that gives a bit of an idea how to address the question. Did anyone choose C as the most effective? Did anyone choose C as the most effective? And did anyone choose A as the least effective? And is there anyone who did not choose either option and would like to, have a question that they may want to ask or would like further clarity as to why C and A are the most and least effective options, respectively? So it appears that I chose D as most and C as least. Okay. So from what I've just explained, the person who chose D as most effective and C as least effective, would you say you have is it made it clearer as to what to take into consideration when choosing what the most effective and the least, why C is the most effective and A is the least effective? So again, if you take it back to much clearer, okay. So if you take it back to the competency framework, so going back to effective decision making, it says effectiveness in this area is about using sound judgment, evidence, and knowledge to arrive at an accurate, expert, professional decision and advice. So in this case, if this question is about refraining from using your own opinion, but follow what's been given there. And it's also being thoughtful about the use of protection of government and public information to ensure it is handled securely and with care. So again, it's about making judgment that's based on facts and not based on your opinions. Hence why, again, this is why the effective decision comes into play with this. So someone said, I thought D was the most effective because that would be wasting the manager's time. Again, this is perfect. I like that, because this is where it's important. This is where the temptation to use our own logic comes into play. And you're right, in other scenarios, it would probably make sense to approach, in other organizations, it makes sense to speak to the line manager. Again, that's an effective option. That's effective, but it's not the least effective. So speaking to your line manager is an effective option because you'll give you clarity, you'll be able to answer some of the questions. So you can take that approach. However, the clue to this is what is the least effective. So D isn't the least effective. It's an effective option, it's not the least. Whereas A is least effective because A is telling you to rewrite the document. Because imagine rewriting the document, but you don't know why it's been written in that way. And someone who's written it may have done so intentionally, and that changes the whole. Imagine someone picking up a document that is not how they expect it to be. And going back to the severity of the document, which is a 20-page European Commission policy. So this is why A is the least effective whatsoever. So I hope that provides further clarity. Okay, we're going to pick up one more option because we're conscious of time, so we can have some time to chance to ask questions. So we've chosen. So we're going to go to question 2. So question 2 is. So I'm going to go through the answer basically. This question. So the answer is most effective is B, and the least effective is D. Did anyone choose B as who chose B as the most effective, and who chose C as the least effective? So we're going to try and move quickly because of time. So if you can let me know what you chose for. So for number, this is question 2. Okay, so someone said they got the most effective correct or least effective. So someone got, okay, chose BA. So in a way, you're all starting to get a feel for how to choose the most effective. And it seems that the least effective is proving slightly trickier than the most effective. So I'd say again, the clue, okay, so the clue behind, so everyone pretty much got the most effective correctly, but still struggling the least effective, which is understandable. So the reason why D is the least effective is because the question is asked you to, says you're responsible for organizing and coordinating the regular meetings of a cross-government group working on public health. So they've been asked to collaborate. Unfortunately, while director level attendance is requested, many directors have started to delegate their attendance, and you are concerned that the group is losing momentum and influence. What should you do? So the clue there is director level attendance is requested. Whilst it's requested, meaning how this question is structured, it's almost as if the directors don't have to be there. So because of this now, they're starting to delegate their attendance to people perhaps lower than them. So again, this is impacting the momentum of and influence of the meeting. So let's say A being, so someone said it chose, someone says in practice, it seems absurd to speak to every director. Again, I love this. This is why this is so interesting, because this is, again, I don't know how much to stress this. Is so in other settings, that would be logical. However, the clue is a civil servant expects, they've set a framework based on how they want civil servants to think and behave. So every organization have the way of doing things. Let's say, for example, I always use this example. At home, you and your friend, you have a few things in common. You may have the same similar interests, like in let's say fashion or music, or I don't know, name whatever hobby you like, skiing, for example. However, you notice that at home, the way you do things and the way your friends do things, the way they do things at their house is different. Although you have some commonalities, however, you behave and act differently. This is the same with every organization. Although they may be in the same sector, they all have the ways of doing things. And usually they set the competencies because of the nature of the work that they do. In the case of the civil service, they serve the public. So everything that they do has to be based on facts, has to be based on evidence. Imagine using your own opinion to make, if there's no evidence to back up your own opinion, the impact that you could actually make in the general public. This is why they set these sort of guidelines and parameters for you to work under, which they believe would ensure that to make you an effective civil servant. So this is why they test people based on their logic, how they think, against the people that they bring on board. They not expect you to be perfect, but it's important that you start becoming aware and familiarizing yourself with how they think, and not just how they think, is why they think the way they think. They're not going to move away from that. So for the purpose of being a civil servant and practice doing this test, it's important that you become familiar with the way and how they do things. So someone says, would the directors ever have a good reason not to attend? The directors, they may do. However, this is why the most effective option being B. So if you were to say, where possible, speak to each of the directors prior to the meeting, prior to the main meeting, to discuss the issues of importance to them on the agenda, so that they see the benefit of attending. So this is why that's the most effective option to take. And someone said, is it because you're responsible for organizing and coordinating the meeting that you should speak to directors to everyone? No, it is not because you're organizing, it's because of the importance of the meeting. So this is why, by speaking to directors and explaining to them to discuss the issues of the importance of the agenda to them, it would help them to understand, okay, this is why they need to be there. And that could alter their decision from delegating the attendance to someone else. So by speaking today, it's not because you're organizing it, it's because of the importance of the meeting. So someone says also the text said director level is requested and not required. Again, these are hypothetical scenarios that they've given you. It says requested, not required. Again, this is why, if you look at the options, the most effective option to take in response to the question is B, because by speaking to them, you might be able to have the chance to convince them. They may still say no. However, you have the chance to convince them. Perfect. Someone said agreed, but if clues are in the language, it is a bit misleading. Yes, but this is why they're testing your judgment. This is why they're testing your ability to make effective decisions. How do you come to a decision? How do you come to, a conclusion? So it's by looking at the evidence. So this is exactly why, going back to effective decision making, is about looking at the evidence. So what's the evidence in question 2? The evidence is director level is requested, and many of them are delegating the position. So there's evidence there. So using those judgments, about making a sound judgment on what you think is the most effective. Like I said, even if you get something if you get an answer that's maybe effective, not the most effective, you may still get half a mark, but obviously the aim is to get the full mark. And whilst I'm on that, just to let you know, the civil service advised that you should aim to score, to be on the safer side, to score up to 85% correctly to stand a chance of, to making it through to the next stage. One thing I will say though, the more you understand the process and how they think, like I said, it will help you to come to an effective conclusion. So again, I'm just slightly running over time. I'm just going to go through one more before we go through any questions. So number 3, the correct answer is A. So most effective is A, and the least effective is C. I'm just going to explain why that is. So the reason why A is the most effective is, it's about spending some time gathering opinions and ideas so that you can make the audit process as simple and efficient as possible for those who need to provide information. So the question is, you're working on an audit of equipment in your department. You have received feedback that people are getting fed up with the administrative burden of the task that you require them to complete so far as part of the audit. You're aware that you need to gather audit information frequently over the next few months. What should you do? So by spending some time gathering opinions and ideas, to make it simpler, would remove the burden and frustrations behind why people are actually completing the audit, because it's important for you to do the audit over the next few months. So by taking the option, you have what's it called? You have a chance to address the concerns that people already have about completing the audit. So again, that's why that's the most effective option. And the reason why C is least effective is because apologize to those affected and say you recognize the burden, suggest that ahead of the next audit, you'll spend time exploring ways to reduce the burden. Again, that doesn't really get you to any solution to what you've been asked to do. It's time wasting. Apologies doesn't really get anything done. And you spending time to explore ways to reduce the burden, again, just prolong things. And let's say you've been given a deadline to complete this by, it's just going to affect that overall. And there's no evidence that this would actually resolve the problem. Whereas B, for example, is create a flyer laying out the dates and requirements of the audit and offering some support to help gather the data to reduce burden. That's an effective option. That could work, but it's not the least effective. Again, what's the other one? D is also send out calendar reminders for when the audit is scheduled so that the request for information expected can be planned for by individuals. That's also, you could do that, but it's not the least effective. Whereas C is counterproductive, hence why C is the least effective. So I hope that gives you a bit of an idea of how the test works. So we're going to use this time just to go through, spend the next 5-10 minutes going through any questions that you may have and provide any clarity before we end the webinar. Before doing so, can I just ask you to please complete a short survey? It is literally, I'm going to put up on the screen. It is literally 2 questions for you to respond to. Can I ask everyone to please complete this survey, and then we use the chance to go through questions and answers afterwards. However, in the meantime, please feel free to start asking your questions as well. So I've put the questions up on the screen. If I could ask you to all complete, that would be greatly appreciated. So a question was, guys, can I also advise that you please use the Q&A button to ask a question so everyone can see it. So one question is, after completing the SJT, is there an additional 5 days following for the next online exercise, or is it 5 days for all the exercise? So once you've completed the SJT, the situational judgment test, you will be if you are successful, you will be sent the link for the e-tray, and you have an additional 5 days to complete that. So the answer is no. The next stage, the e-tray exercise stage, is not. But I'm assuming you mean the e-tray, or are you referring to the behavioral test? So yeah, the e-tray. So that's not included. That's not included in the 5 days for the situational judgment test. Guys, can I please strongly advise that you use the Q&A button to ask your questions, please? Thank you. The next question is, do you have to do well in both the SJT and behavioral questioning? What if I do really well? I don't, but not personality. I don't believe that they're both scored differently. So you need to do well on both. And just want to also mention as well, if you have any form of learning, so any form of disability, either mental disability like dyslexia or so on and so forth, or learning, so please declare that with the civil service, because they do take that into consideration, and you may be exempted from. This is directed to everyone. You may be who this might relate to. You may be exempted. They usually exempt candidates from their behavioral test. So if that's you, please ensure that you declare that or have declared that already in your form. So I'm still waiting for 6 more people to complete the survey. If I could ask you to please complete it, that would be greatly appreciated. So questions. So we have another, do we have another, there's a question at the beginning. Do you think reviewing the summary of the competencies you provided would be enough to go into the SJT with the correct mentality, or would you need to read the full competency? The summary that we have provided is just to give you an overview, a quick summary of actually what the competencies are. However, imagine you are going to be potentially working for this organization. So really and truly, you want to really immerse yourself into the organization's culture before you get there. So my advice would be, we highly recommend that you read and study the full competency framework, bearing in mind to focusing on the level 3, because that's the section that's relevant to you. So it's always good to read the full document, focusing on level 3, which is the HEO, the higher executive officer level. So that's what we highly recommend. And there are additional resources online to give you more information, including the link, the blog link where you found the tests as well. Someone said they cannot see the survey. Okay, I don't know why that's the case, but it's absolutely fine. I'm just going to leave the survey up for another few seconds. So any questions before we leave? So let's use this time to go through more questions. So how many days do you have for the E-tray after passing the SJT? Do you mean how many days do you have to receive the E-tray, or how many days do you have to complete it? If it's the latter, you're usually given a deadline date to complete the E-tray exercise by. They normally tell you when you need to complete it by. How do they score you? Do you use your online test marks and video interview? No, you are scored every stage, so you have to, the marks are not combined together. You have to pass each stage. So SJT, you only move to E-tray if you pass the situational judgment test. And you only move to the video interview if you pass the electronic tray, which is E-tray. You only move to that stage if you pass the E-tray exercise. And you only move to assessment center if you pass the video interview. So it's not combined, it's all scored round by round. So how many days do you complete the E-tray? Again, you'll be given a deadline date of when to complete the E-tray. So it's normally 5 days, but you'll be given a date of when you need to complete it by. So what if I do well in the test and video interview but not do so? Again, like I said, you can only move if you don't do well. Again, everything is scored round by round. So if you do well on the test and video interview, but don't do so, do well in the assessment center, unfortunately, you'll not be taken to the next stage. But the key is to do well at each stage. And the way to do so is the more you study, understand the competency framework and do as much practice. Again, we will be running several practice sessions, both for the E-tray, video interview, and assessment center as well, practice. So the more you practice, the more understanding you have, the more confident you will be in responding to the questions. So just to repeat that again, the more understanding you have of what's expected of you, the more confident you will be. You all have the ability already You all have the ability to be an effective civil servant. You all have the ability to work. You're competent, you know, from the work, your degree so far, you're at university. So you have a lot of the, you know, what I'd call the behavioral traits that they are looking for. You've been involved in society. You might have been involved in societies. You might have had part-time jobs. So you understand that organizations will have to work with people already in your course, in group work. So you have a lot of these attributes already, these competencies. But the key is just to understand the civil service competence, which is unique to them, and apply yourself to that and ask yourself, actually, how do I demonstrate these traits? So the reason I'm highlighting that, because usually often people think that, oh, they look and say, you know, this is not, you know, I'm not good enough, or I'm not confident enough, I cannot do this. However, the more understanding you have, it helps you to know what's expected of you, and you're able to demonstrate yourself in an effective manner because you all have the ability already. I just want to highlight that. So there's another question. Is the deadline to complete the SJT E-Trade behavior test, or do you have to start before? The first stage, all you need to worry about right now, if you haven't started your application, is the situational judgment test and the behavioral test. That is all that you need to worry about right now. And so long as you start that before 12 p.m. Thursday, the 25th of October, you will have up to 5 days to complete it. So long as you start before the deadline, you have 5 days to complete it. So I hope that answers the question on deadline to complete. So if you then are successful, which I hope and I believe you all will be successful, we'll make it through the SJ, the situational judgment question and behavioral test. If you all make it through that stage, and then you will then be sent a link and instruction how to complete the E-Trade exercise, and you'll be given a new deadline of when to complete that. So the deadline is just to start the situational judgment test, or to start your application. That's the deadline. It's not the deadline to complete the E-Trade exercise. So I hope that helps to answer that question. So the next question is, I'm worried about the behavioral questionnaire. Any tips? I've done these before and failed. Okay. Just to go back to the slide. So I'm going to, if you can all see the slide. So it says the behavioral test. The main thing that with this, what you're being tested on is really giving an honest response about how you would approach it based on your own behavior towards the competency, the civil service competency framework. So the clue is understanding the framework will help you to understand how you would approach the situation. So when they say honest, it's not saying, for example, this is how you want to make it relevant. You want to make how you would approach something relevant to actually what the organization is looking for. You know, so for the person who's expressed concerns, we also are conducting a lot of one-to-one coaching session. And if this is something that you feel that you would like to take up on, I would highly recommend that you get in touch and we can book a session to have a 1 hour coaching session over the phone to go through any concerns that you may have and provide further clarity. So my suggestion would be to send an email to campus@elevationnetworks.org requesting for a one-to-one telephone coaching. So I hope that that's helpful. So have room for 2 more questions before 2 more minutes to go through questions before we leave. Again, I would say, so look, another question is, should we be conscious of time when doing the test? Does this affect our overall mark? Usually the thing is, the test is designed to put you under pressure. It's don't dwell so much, so long as you understand. My thing is just understand the framework first of all. So when you get to the test, you will feel equipped and empowered to respond to the questions, because then your response and judgment is based on a solid understanding of the framework. So in addition to that is, yes, it is, you've been advised to say it usually expects for the test to take up to 30 minutes to complete it. However, it's okay if you don't complete it within that time. It is what it is. But the main thing is by doing more practice and familiarizing yourself and timing yourself by doing more practice, it should hopefully help you to know how long you want to spend on each question. So the clue is, do not spend too much time on each question. Understand the question, think, okay, what are they asking me? And what's the most effective option to this? What's the least effective option? And make a judgment from your understanding of the competency framework. So I hope that answers that question. Again, for those of you, you are welcome to leave if you wish to. But for those of you who still want to stay to ask further questions, please do so. So we have 1 more minute to go through additional questions. And if you are leaving, I just want to say thank you for your time, and it's been an absolute pleasure to have you all join today's webinar. And I hope you feel confident, and I hope you feel, equipped, and you understand, have a better understanding of the process. Keep practicing, and print a copy of the competency framework and have it by your bedside. Literally read it every day. The first thing you do in the morning when you wake up, and the last thing before you go to bed. So make that your bedtime reading over the next few days before you start your test. If you have any questions or challenges or concerns, do not hesitate to get in touch with us. Send us an email to campus@elevationnetworks.org, and we will do our best to respond as early as possible. Just say thank you to those of you who will be leaving, and for those for those of you who will be staying, I have another 30 seconds to go through questions with you. Thank you. So the final question says, so with the behavioral questions, should we measure our own behavior against the competency framework? That's the idea of it, yes, is to look at how you would respond honestly to how you would approach the situation against the competency framework. So this is why having an understanding of the competency framework is important. It will be useful. So I hope that answers your question. On that note, guys, I just want to say thank you once again. My name is Oris Kobe, and I look forward to working with you all in the near future and over the coming days and weeks. And thank you for your kind feedback to the webinar. Have a wonderful day. Bye for now.